Chapter 2. A Treacherous Ride. When they had ridden over a hill and were out of danger of being spotted by the Svaktans, Mari and her guards slowed their foaming horses to a halt. Breathlessly, Mari slid to the ground. Her guards did likewise. The 5 horses wandered off away and lowered their heads to graze. Sitting down on a rock that rested at the foot of the slope behind her, Mari steadied herself. The excitement of the morning caught up with her, and she felt dizzy. Her life had always been very organised and unchanging. Prearranged, really. It had been well over a year since she had even left Fodormore's walls. And now, she had been suddenly evacuated from her home, which was in mortal danger, and was racing away with only 4 guards to seek help and asylum. Her life had changed in the work of a moment.
Lady Mari?
Mari looked up to see that one of the guards had approached her with a bow. He was a young man in his mid-20s of considerable height and build, with dark hair and eyes. He was dressed in a dark grey Fodormorian uniform, with a knee-length cape that buttoned down the front, rather like a cloak. His face was one that showed general friendliness, though it was now shrouded with concern for the circumstances, mingled with respect for Her Highness. Mari stood to her feet and motioned for him to continue.
What road shall we take, my lady?
His voice was low and pleasant.
The path north to Azalhead? The path south to Salavia? Or yet another?
We shall ride to Azalhead. 'Tis the only place near enough where we will be safe, and we may perhaps be able to persuade the good King Darian to help us in our struggle with the Svaktans. In Azalhead we are sure to find ready aid. The man bowed.
As you wish, my lady.
He suddenly stopped and looked toward the grassy hill that stood near on their right. Mari looked at him questioningly and followed his gaze, then froze as a sound came to her ears. A heavy sound. The earth began to tremble far below her feet. Horses were coming. Many horses. The princess's and the guard's wide eyes met for an instant as they continued to listen, stiffened in place. Suddenly, an arrow passed just between them. Then more and more began showering around them as a score of Svaktan horsemen came over the top of the hill. Too frightened to even cry out, Mari turned and fled. Dodging arrows, she ran to her horse, clambered into the saddle, and began galloping west toward the distant woods. She rode for some time before braving a glance behind her. When she did, she gasped and pulled her horse to a quick stop. Mari's guards had jumped onto their horses, but instead of following her, they had turned and pulled out their swords. Mari shook her head in disbelief. Surely 4 men were not going to try to defeat 20. The guard she had just spoken with turned and saw her. He waved her on.
Go! Go! We'll try and hold them back.
Then Mari understood, and she felt her eyes fill at their bravery. Hesitating only an instant more, she turned and dashed away. For some time, the princess did not look back, knowing what she would see if she did. But finally, as she crested a rise in the land, she could stand it no longer. Turning once more, she watched in horror as 1, 2, 3 of her guards were slain. The last guard, making a desperate move and losing his sword in the process, turned his horse and came fleeing toward her, his cape flying behind him. When he looked up, Mari could see he was the same she had spoken to. Seeing her, the guard waved his arm wildly and pointed towards the distant woods. Mari quickly reined her horse in the direction of the trees. The hill on which she had stopped sloped gently up on the eastern side, but on the west it dropped steeply. Mari had to ride down this slowly, so that by the time she had reached the bottom and ridden to the edge of the woods, her guard had already reached the hill. She halted and turned back to see him ride over the top of the hill and skillfully gallop his snorting horse down the side of it. He rode a little away from the slope. Then, to her surprise, he turned back and halted. The Svaktans soon appeared, but before they could spot Mari, the guard yelled loudly, waving his arms, then raced away in the opposite direction of the princess. The furious soldiers angrily fired arrows at him. The guard lay flat upon his horse, but one of the Svaktans aimed for the horse itself, and his arrow sank deeply into its flesh. Letting out a scream of terror, the animal reared and plunged, a long shaft protruding from its leg. With a yell of surprise, the guard flew over the horse's head and landed with a thud on the hard ground. Quickly, he jumped up with a winded gasp and raced madly to the forest on foot. It took the Svaktans some time to come single file down the only path on the steep hill that permitted a horse's descent, but they soon were in pursuit, the gap between the guard and the soldiers closing alarmingly fast. Mari was horrified. She couldn't just sit there and watch another guard be killed. Not knowing at all what she would do, she broke off a low-hanging branch as she thought it might be useful, spurred her horse into action, and hurried towards the man. 5 Svaktans were now charging toward him, with another coming swiftly down the hill behind. The guard had almost reached the trees by this point. Gasping for breath, he looked behind him. He saw that the Svaktans were close behind, but that also, riding toward him from his left, was quite a different person. Much to the Svaktans' surprise, he suddenly changed direction as he raced toward Mari. They turned to follow him and saw the princess riding toward them. As she passed the guard, he gave a flying leap and landed right behind her saddle. Her startled horse gave a snort of surprise and balanced the change in weight as it continued to gallop toward the trees. They flew right past the Svaktan horsemen, who now swiftly changed direction once again. Fodormor was fighting a losing battle. The Svaktans had the element of surprise on their side and enormous numbers, so that they were soon defeating the Fodormorian army. King Bernak had tried to call a retreat, but to no avail. The walls of Fodormor were right behind them, and the Svaktan army had surrounded them. There was no way of escape. The king saw in the distance the armies of Svakta begin to pour into his country through the north wall gate. Fodormor would soon be conquered. The Fodormorian soldiers continued to fight valiantly, and the king fought fiercely beside them, but they could not succeed. After 4 hours of hard battling, only 300 Fodormorians were left. Against the Svaktans, it was nigh 10 to 1. King Bernak knew what it would mean to surrender. Fodormor would be controlled by the Svaktans. Ruthless slavery would take the lives of his people, and a horrific death would be granted to himself. But finally, the king shook his head sadly and beckoned the Fodormorian army commander. The Svaktans would never let up, he knew. A pain gripped his heart. If he didn't surrender now, all of his men would be killed. He grasped the commander's arm.
Give the call of surrender. We've lost this one.
The commander's eyes filled bitterly as he threw his sword point down into the ground and gave a shrill blast on a small horn. Immediately, all of the Fodormorians dropped their weapons and sat down upon the ground in sign of surrender. The Svaktan soldiers relaxed their weapons and stood tall, a wall surrounding the conquered nation of Fodormor. There were a few minutes of silence, the first silence of that horrible day. Then suddenly, the Svaktans parted, and they all bowed. As they did so, a tall, middle-aged man in magnificent armour, with a rich mantle draped over his broad shoulders, appeared among them. His gait bore contempt, and his glaring eyes were taunting. Askson, the Svaktan king, walked through his saluting army until he came to the defeated Fodormorians. Halting before King Bernak, who sat on the ground with his men, he glowered down at him.
Well, Bernak, finally, I have defeated you.
Bernak steadily returned his gaze.
It's been many years, Askson. How go things with you?
I'll have none of your wit.
His large frame seemed to grow 10 times.
If you had any sense at all, you would keep silent and be obedient, that your execution might come faster.
Faster.
Yes, faster. But no, I will let you live a long while, savouring the delights of being hung, and watching your men be my slaves, and your daughter find her way to your prison cell.
The evil king smiled slyly as the colour slowly drained from King Bernac's face. Askson squatted down beside him and continued.
That was her, wasn't it? That rode off with 4 others.
He grinned childishly.
I figured she would be about 20 by now.
He stood.
And from my scout's description and your colourless face, I have my answer. It's over, Bernac. You have been defeated and are under my control. Take them away.